Hey guys, hope everyone's doing well. Today I'm going to talk about tuberculosis. In the beginning, tuberculosis was discovered like 1400 years ago, and it's been around for thousands and thousands of years. The pathogen that causes active tuberculosis is Mycobacterium tuberculosis, and primarily it attacks the lungs. You can have other signs and symptoms in other parts of the body, the brain, spinal cord, anywhere, because the pathogen can metastasize and move throughout the body if not kept in check by the body's natural immune response. Like I mentioned earlier, it was discovered in 1882 by Dr. Robert Koch. And the earliest discovery of the bacteria was found 9,000 years ago in a city that is now covered by the Mediterranean, but a mother and son were excavated and they had signs of having the disease. And the earliest written accounts were around 3,300 years ago in India. And this disease has went by many, many names over the years. And the pale disease, some people thought it was hereditary up until 1882. And it's been around for a very long time. And the reason it's been around for such a long time is because it can lie dormant. It's almost like HSV1 and 2 in that aspect, because you can be infected with it and your body's immune response can keep you from having symptoms. Then later on down the road, you might develop a cough or like portray it as allergies, and then next thing you know, you were spreading tuberculosis when you cough, talk, sing, X, Y, and Z. And once you are infected, the bacteria settles in the lungs. It then begins to replicate, and your body will respond to it. Your macrophages in your alveoli will eat the bacteria to dispose of it and get rid of it. But if the number of bacteria is too high, or you cannot mount a quality immune response to the disease, that's when you develop the symptoms, because it will continually reproduce within the macrophages until it destroys the macrophages and then begin infection and spreading. But 85% of the time, when exposed to tuberculosis in the first couple stages, you will not have any symptoms. Your body will respond to it, and if you have a good immune system, your body will take care of it naturally. And here's a picture of where it sits in the immune system, or in the lungs, and you can see by the picture, you begin in the lungs and then have pathways from the lungs throughout the rest of the body. And the scariest part of tuberculosis is the latency. With latent TB, you can have it, not know it, and like I said earlier, just develop a cough later on down the road. Like if you get sick or your immune system gets compromised and you can't mount that immune response that is needed to fight the disease. And that's why tuberculosis is so hard on immunocompromised people, and I'll touch on that in a minute. And here's a picture of the difference between latent and active TB. And you can see from the picture the bacteria is spreading throughout the body in the active side, but in the latent side, it's sitting in the macrophages. It spreads through airborne droplets, like most people, the studies I've read, that they don't know they have it because it's like a cough. It's, in that initial stage, it hasn't developed into something serious enough for them to get checked out. Most people, if it's fall or spring, have allergies, and they'll think that that's what it is, when sometimes, depending on what level of contagion you could be, is when you should be worried if it may be active TB. Economically, tuberculosis affects more lower income countries and more developing countries because they do not have the access to the medical care that is needed to test for it, treat it, keep track of it, even know that they have it. And the UN decided that it would take $13 billion US for the world to treat, test, and care for tuberculosis. And then in the last couple of years with COVID-19, they had to defund that fight against tuberculosis from $5.8 billion to $5.3 billion because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And tuberculosis is still there, it's still prevalent, and it's still a global problem. And as you can see on this slide, the areas that are normally lower income developing countries have the worst outbreaks, cases, contagions. And it's not cheap to treat tuberculosis. There's rounds of different antibiotics you have to go through. Most of the time, if your skin test is positive, you will have to get a chest x-ray to see if there's scarring, because it will set up a scar in your lungs that can be shown via a chest x-ray. And there's not, especially in low-income countries, the access to have this ability. And to test for tuberculosis, it's very spotty. It's a skin test. Basically, they inject you with a PPD, and then depending on your level of infection potential, depends on how big the response from the skin test can be. If you're, no chance, you haven't traveled out of the country or anything, at level 1, your spot on your arm that will be shown in the next slide can be 5 to 9 millimeters. And then category 2 and category 3, anything greater than that will say that you are a positive. You have some form of tuberculosis. Either you've been exposed to it, or it's either latent or active. Tuberculosis is very dangerous for the immunocompromised because it feeds off of that suppressed immune system. If your body cannot naturally fight it, and you have something like HIV, cancers, you have to take drugs that suppress your immune system, renal failure, anything that requires another immune response or suppresses your immune system will allow tuberculosis to grow exponentially throughout the body, or throughout the lungs, and then spread throughout the body. Currently, there's just a combination of drugs that you can take for tuberculosis. Most of them are on 3-month to 9-month regimens. They have extreme side effects. They're very expensive, and they just keep you in the latent side of it. They don't actually cure the disease. And there's a vaccine, the BCR vaccine. It's not highly used in the United States. It's mainly used overseas, and it's given to children in their initial rounds of vaccines. And it's been around for 80 years, and it's not really that great. I mean, it doesn't prevent the disease, and it, in some cases, doesn't prevent the disease from going from latent to active. These are the 4 key drugs in the stage 1 of tuberculosis treatments. There are other drugs because tuberculosis has developed a mutation effect to where they are resistant to these first 4 drugs, MDR and XDR tuberculosis. Those have to go through a different mode of action drugs to be treated because these drugs have been used for so long to treat this disease. And the future of tuberculosis really depends on how much money can be spent towards it. Globally, right now, we're still in a pandemic, so there's not going to be a lot of focus on it until we either fix this pandemic, cure this pandemic, but it's going to be expensive and it's going to take time and money, and there's a lot of countries that don't have that. But there have been some developments in the vaccine world, better treatments. They found that if they use the BCR vaccine and they do it through an IV instead of through dermally, it's 50% more effective at preventing it from going latent to active in the test subjects. And in the end, there's just going to have to be more access to better healthcare, better testing, more money, because tuberculosis is going to be around for a long time. Thank you.